Hey there, thanks for tuning in to The View from Monkey's Eyebrow. We are broadcasting out of Joe's Place in Monkey's Eyebrow, located in Ballard County, Kentucky. We'll be talking with the folks who live in Ballard County. They are some of the most fascinating characters, and will share some of the most interesting stories you'll ever hear. By the time they're done, you might even want to live here. Your host is Joe Culver.
I was living in Morgantown, West Virginia, working for the United States Department of Energy when I retired at the end of the year 2010. I moved here to my place in Monkey's Eyebrow a couple of months later. I call this place Joe's Place. It is just 6¼ acres, but I call it my farm. Oh, I don't do any farming. I'm not a farmer. But a farmer rents part of my property. He usually plants corn one year and soybeans the next. I'm 79 years old. In the last couple of years, I've been writing songs and recording them on my YouTube channel, which I call Music from Monkey's Eyebrow. I have 57 original songs on that channel. Some of my lyrics are pretty good, but you wouldn't know that from listening to me. I can't sing. I'm not a singer. I have one song titled Moving Back to Kentucky. We're visiting today with my good friend Janet Steele. That song reminds Janet of a significant part of her life. I'm going to sing just the first part of it before we start talking to Janet. Wealth wasn't common in the Commonwealth, so I didn't quite know what to do with myself. Then I heard up north that they paid big bucks, so I moved up there just to try my luck. Worked 30 years in a factory making trucks. I gave it my all of the time. Was named top man on the assembly line. Moving home to Kentucky never left my mind. I married my honey, but we saved some money. Now we've got enough to move back to Kentucky. I'm moving back to Kentucky.
Back to Kentucky.
I'm moving back to Kentucky.
Back to Kentucky.
Moving back to Kentucky.
Back to Kentucky.
Moving back to Kentucky.
Back to Kentucky.
I'm moving back to Kentucky, to the state that's my real home. Well, good morning, Janet.
Good morning, Joe. It's good to be here.
Well, you seem a little nervous, though, and I can understand why you might be nervous here in my professional 2-microphone recording setup in Studio 1A in Podcast Central at Joe's Place. For the folks listening out there, what I just called Studio 1A is my living room. We're surrounded by dialysis supplies and Herman's designated sleeping area, which takes up a fourth of the living room. But anyway, are you a little nervous today?
A little bit maybe.
A little bit maybe. You had a situation one time when your nerves kind of got to you. Can you tell us about that?
When I was a junior in high school and Mrs. McAllister informed us that we were going to have to get up in front of the class and her to do an oral book report. I do not remember what book it was. I've put that bad memory out someplace to go away forever. but yeah, it sort of did a number on my nerves, and I don't guess I ever got over it, maybe.
Well, you'll be seated here, but you can give a book report if you want to. Have you read any good books?
I'm reading one right now that's really good. It's by Colleen Coble, and the name of it's Anathema, and it's about Amish murders, and that's kind of a different type Amish book that I'm used to reading, because usually they're all love stories and stuff like that, but this was about a double homicide, and you know, it's getting really good.
Who's the author?
Colleen Coble.
I don't know that name. I've never. But you know, I read a book. It's been 2 or 3 months ago. There's an author who grew up in Bandana, who apparently is pretty prominent in books about people in the teenage years.
Really?
I can't remember her name, but it was an interesting book. I enjoyed it a lot.
Not familiar with that.
and I'm not familiar with her name, and that's the only book I've read. But she has several, and they rank pretty high on the Amazon and other places. You told a story about being nervous one time when you were supposed to sing at church.
Oh.
Will you tell that one to us?
Well, back in the day, church was our social life basically, and our friends would go home with us after church and spend the afternoon, or vice versa. I would go home with them, spend the afternoon. But anyway, this particular afternoon, one of the older ladies at church had asked Ann Foster and I to sing a special that night, and so we practiced all afternoon on this special that we were going to sing, and we got good before the day was over, really good. But when it came time to perform, according to Ann, I just sort of stood there and giggled, and she had to carry us both. So the funny thing was, years and years later, we were back visiting on an Easter Sunday when the choir was doing a cantata, and lo and behold, they sang that song, and Ann could not look out in the audience and look at me at all, because it was going to bring, her to a screeching halt.
Well, you can giggle a little if you want, but I really kind of expect you to talk more than giggle. But you mentioned Ann, and Ann and I graduated the same year in Ballard. Her maiden name and your married name are the same. What's your relationship?
She and my husband were first cousins.
But this goes back to a long time ago. Why were the two of you designated to sing a song? It doesn't sound like you felt related back in those days.
We didn't. We were just really good friends, and had grown up together in church, and just knew each other that way.
Okay. Well, let's talk about your early life. Tell us some about your parents and where you grew up and where you went to school, and if there's anything else you'd like to add.
My parents were Jack and Ruth Rudolph. My dad, well, his original name was Elvie Lynn. He grew up in this area around Monkey's Eyebrow, Needmore area. And his aunts, instead of calling him Elvie Lynn, sort of shortened it to Evelyn. He didn't like that at all. So at some point in time, he changed his name to Jack, and that's who he was from then on. But he grew up in this area. My mother was Ben Morris's daughter. She grew up on the farm where I live now, and she ended up...
That was Judge Ben Morris?
Mm-hmm. Yes. And I think she moved to Wycliffe when he got active in his doings, whatever. When she was about 12, I think. They left the farm and moved to Wycliffe. She and Daddy married in 1930. They lived in this area, I think on Smoky Road, somewhere in this area. And at some point in time, they bought the farm where I now live, where I was born and raised.
That's on Highway 286.
Correct, yeah. And went to school at Blandville. Good 8 years at Blandville, enjoyed every minute of it. Then my 4 years at Ballard, and that pretty much it. After I graduated from Ballard, I moved to Jackson, Michigan, because I couldn't wait to get away from Kentucky at that point in time.
Let's talk about Blandville.
Okay.
At one time, Blandville and all the other schools in the towns in Ballard, Blandville was a 12-year school, I believe. It was elementary and high school.
Oh, yeah.
Is that right?
My brother Morris, his graduating class of 52 was the last class that graduated from Blandville before they consolidated with Ballard.
And all those fine community high schools sort of vanished, and everybody went to Ballard Memorial High School where you and I graduated.
Correct. Yeah. He was the last class to graduate at Blandville. So all 6 of them. He said he could have bragged about being 6th in the class, and sounded really good to anybody that didn't know him. So.
Your brother Morris Lynn told stories about a possum, didn't he?
Oh, yes.
What was that?
Well, that's kind of a long story too. My husband had trouble with critters in the garden, so he started setting traps to, do away with the raccoons, mainly because they were getting in our corn. In fact, one year they wiped out 14 rows of sweet corn. So he sort of declared war on the raccoons. But in the live traps that he kept setting, he kept catching possums instead of raccoons. And he would come in telling some tale about the possum or whatever. And Morris and Pat were there visiting. Well, they had bought the little trailer so they could have a place to stay when they came down, because they bought part of the farm when we bought our part. And anyway, Morris turned possum stories the possum stories that Tom was telling into real life stories that you had to read them like a possum was talking, with the language and the drawl or whatever.
Did he have a particular possum name?
Harold. Yes,
Harold.
Yes. We have a book here with illustrations and everything that my daughter drew to turn Harold famous. He's quite famous in the family, actually. But yeah, lots of Harold stories that Morris wrote, and we're very appreciative of them and having them to remember him by. But yeah,
Well, in addition to storytelling, you had at least some musical talent in your family background.
My dad was an excellent bass singer, just really, really awesome. And he was in a local quartet at the church. And, they sang maybe at other churches or at community building functions or things like that. They weren't well known, but except for local. But yes, that's always a good memory of.
Do you sing?
I used to a little bit, not in public. Choir,
I won't
church
ask
choir.
you to.
Please, Joe, don't ask me to sing.
You'll just giggle like you did with
Yeah, that would probably be right. And you would giggle probably.
Well, if I sang, it would bring tears to your eyes.
Well, literally, it does bring tears to my eyes when I sing, because that's a thing with me. I don't know why. But.
When you graduated from high school and married, you didn't continue to live in Ballard County. In fact, when I wrote and recorded my song, Moving Back to Kentucky, you said it reminded you of what happened after you were married. What caused you to move?
Well, at the time that we got engaged, he was driving a stock truck for Woodrow Piper, and the salary wasn't exactly the kind of salary that one would be able to get married on. So he had friends that worked at the GM truck plant in Indianapolis, and they convinced him that they were hiring. So he went to Indy and got a job, and we got married and moved to Indy. So that was the reason for all of that. So,
And how long did you live there?
30 years.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah.
Well, then later you moved back to Ballard County. What caused that?
Well, it's not something that I ever expected to do, actually, but the farm had been in the family for generations. Generations, long time before Judge Morris. And my mother was determined that the farm stay in the family. So Morris and I decided that we would make Mother the offer that the two of us, go in and buy the farm. So he bought the east end of it, and Tom and I bought the west end of the farm. So for now, it's still in the family, but that was sort of the reason for it. And Tom was talking about taking early retirement from General Motors, and so that's what he did. He retired when he was 52 and was.
What year was that?
He retired in 1991. We officially moved in 92.
You moved to a part of the county that on Highway 286 that has some communities with names that might make a visitor do a double take. I know there's Hamburg.
Yeah.
There's a little community named New York.
That's where I live. Yep.
And do you know why those
I
names
have
came to
no
be?
idea how the names came to be, but Hamburg, when I was a child, they actually had two grocery stores across the road from each other. And New York had a grocery store as well as a croquet court that I don't remember it, but my grandfather, of course, lived in the area, and I think he stayed on the croquet court quite a bit, but from what I've heard. But yeah, it was quite a little thriving community.
Well, I can understand why a croquet court would cause it to be named New York.
Well, can you explain that one to me?
No, and I've got a lot of explanations about the name Monkey's Eyebrow, and I'm not sure anybody knows now which one is actually true. There's another little community out there called Gage that had a store, and it had it had a kind of a restaurant in it.
Well, the original store was just a grocery store and gas pumps, but it was across the road there from where the present one is, which is empty, by the way. I wish somebody would open it up, but yeah, that was another good loafing place where my dad hung out and did the thing with telling all the stories that we listened to all of our lives growing up. But yeah, Hinkville, Gage, New York. Well, actually, the store at New York was a little bit further west, but the one that he loafed at. But yeah, it's good memories.
Seemed like Billy Bob. My Uncle Billy Bob, by the way, used to go to the Gage one on Saturday mornings fairly often for breakfast. But he told, wasn't there a doctor that either practiced out in that area or lived out
Dr.
there?
Ashbrooks, yes. He was the family doctor who made house calls.
And where was his practice?
Well, the building is still there. It's a tiny, tiny little building, and it has deteriorated now very bad, but it's just at the edge of Gage, right
Near Gage, okay.
on the north side of the road, yeah.
I'm not sure on those communities where you can really decide where the edge is. like here at Monkey's Eyebrow, where are the boundaries?
Right.
People several miles away claim they live in Monkey's Eyebrow, but Monkey's Eyebrow was actually a little bit down the road from where my house is.
Really?
The original Monkey's Eyebrow. There were one at the bottom of the hill, and later Ples Everett had a business and some houses up at the top of the hill, and that was kind of the new Monkey's Eyebrow.
I had a great uncle that lived in this area, Robert Yancey. He was one of the ones that they said was responsible for naming it, but who knows?
Well, I don't remember if it was his daughter, Diane Yancey.
Diana, she was a relative, yeah.
She told me that the story that their family had was that he was logging in this area, and he got his log truck and with mules stuck.
Yeah.
And he, I guess, walked back to Bandana and asked for somebody to come help. And they said, well, how deep are you mired up down there? And he said, well, about up to a monkey's eyebrow.
Yeah, that's the story I always heard, too. Yeah. So who knows if it's true or not.
Well, there's another one about Beeler Hill and some shrubs around. And I know 3 or 4 or 5 stories. But anyway, let's go back to Highway 286. I notice on Facebook very often somebody's posting about a semi-truck overturning on there. Why is that? It seems like a lot of them.
Well, it was never designed for semi-trucks, for one thing. It's too narrow, and there are no shoulders whatsoever on the road for correcting if you do make a mistake, because if you're off, you're off. It's just the way it is. And we have, in our yard, I've had a semi full of logs to turn over and dump their logs in my yard, taking out the natural gas thing out by the road. And
you live on kind of a straight stretch, don't you?
Yeah, that doesn't matter. If I don't know, if they look down or look away and run off the edge, they can't get it back on without turning over. And it was never designed for trucks. It just wasn't, and they need to fix that. But if they did, I probably wouldn't have any yard left. So,
well, I think a lot of you, they don't let one of those trucks turn over on you.
Exactly. But we've had several. One just recently ran off right in front of my house, and it's not just semis. We've had, like you said, straight stretch of road, but people just goof up and make mistakes. And just in the past probably 10 years, we've had at least 5 wrecks right in our yard. So,
oh my goodness.
Yeah, it's common anymore.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I don't think I would want to get off the bus and walk down 286 like I used to when I was in high school. I'd get off at New York and walk home to keep from having to ride the bus all the way around the route. Don't think that would be safe anymore.
I wouldn't recommend that either.
No.
Several years ago, and even in my memory, a lot of these smaller towns in Ballard County were pretty active in retail and in other business, but that's almost stopped in recent years. And I guess that's because of good highways. It's easy to travel to Paducah or Nashville or St. Louis or Cape Girardeau. But there's been some of a comeback in the more recent times. And the town of Wycliffe was helped an awful lot by your daughter and her husband. And can you tell us about them?
Well, I can a little bit, I guess. They are just very, very active in trying to get Wycliffe back to its heyday. They moved to Wycliffe from Texas in 2016, I think it was, mainly to help me out, I think, because of what we were going through at home, and they felt like they needed to be here for me and her dad, but they just have a love of trying to make things right and fix things, and he has visions that are very admirable for the things he wants to see happen in Wycliffe. I don't know if it will ever come to be or not, but...
Now, when you say they, your daughter is Lana, and her husband is Henry, but goes by Chip.
Correct,
right?
Yes.
And he just recently was elected to be county magistrate from Wycliffe.
Yes, he was. Very proud of him, and it's kind of hard for an outsider to be elected, I think, to offices like that, so... And I would think they're still sort of considered outsiders. It's kind of hard to, get your roots in when you come in. But
well, they had never lived in Wycliffe or Ballard County until they moved back.
Never had, but he sees an old building and wants it fixed. So he's taken on quite a few of them to try to refurbish and do something with. So I'm proud of them.
Well, I think Wycliffe certainly has benefited from their presence, and they've taken a couple of the older houses, the fine old houses there in Wycliffe, and helped them out a lot too.
They're working on it anyway. The one they live in was the Milton Anderson house, and they've done a lot of work to it. And he's working on the Jevedon house now, so yeah, he's.
Did they not also get the Shadone house?
Yeah, they have the Shadone house.
Milton Anderson, who really, M.C. Anderson, was a prominent attorney back in the day.
Right, and they bought that house with everything still in it. The antique furniture and everything that was the Andersons' furnitures went with the house when they bought it. So that was really a good thing. So, yeah.
I think so too. I was in that house a time or two.
Really?
Visiting the daughter that moved in.
Miss Evelyn.
Miss Evelyn, and I went with Billy Bob a couple of times. But it was a very attractive house. very comfortable type of house too.
Yeah, it is. Very, very nice.
And they're living in
Yes,
that house now.
yes.
Now, in addition to Lana, do you have other children? And
Yes, I do.
Where are they?
Well, my next daughter is Karen, and she and her husband have moved to Kentucky from Indiana, and they have built a new home right behind my house. So for now, we're keeping the farm still in the family. I don't know what will happen down the road, but for now, she owns the acreage behind me, and my nephews, Morris's sons, own the acreage on the east end. So we're keeping Mother's wish alive for the time being anyway. I know all good things will come to an end eventually, but, right now it's still a go.
Well, you're kind of like a daughter magnet that attracted these daughters that never grew up here.
Well, I never dreamed, I really didn't, that it would happen that way. And I know my son will never move back. I can pretty much guarantee that. He's still in Indiana. He's an electrician in Indianapolis and actually works at the Eli Lilly business, not for Eli Lilly, but the electrical company that he works for is Eli Lilly's electrical company of choice, so they have headquarters there in Eli Lilly's. But that's where he is. And
now, when you say Eli Lilly, I think of flour.
No, Eli Lilly's a drug company.
Something about that just suggested flour to me.
Really? Because Lily is a flower.
Is it white lily or something?
Yeah,
flower
all kinds of lily flowers. But Eli Lilly is a drug company.
And what's his name? Your son's name?
Craig Steele.
So he was born in Indianapolis, and
they
stayed there.
They all were born in Indianapolis, but like I said, I never dreamed the girls would want to move to Ballard County, but.
Well, you must not have told him you moved.
Well, I think he knows it. I talked to him last night, so I think he knows. He's happy where he is. But,
well, that's great. Being happy where you are sometimes is not easy.
That's true. And it was hard to move back. That's why I was so surprised that the girls moved here, because they, other than visiting and, visiting grandparents and things like that, they really didn't have any tie to Ballard County. So, but they wanted to move, so they did. And
it sounds like in some ways, Janet, that you stopped thinking of Ballard County as home. You actually you felt settled in Indiana.
I did. I mean, 30 years of friendships and putting down roots and everything there, you do. I lived there longer than I lived, in Kentucky at that time. But yeah, it was hard to give up, everything. I'm glad now we did, because our house has been, well, the whole east side of town is not a desirable place to live anymore. So I'm glad we did it. But it wasn't the easiest thing I've ever done. And I'm sure you probably found this out too. You move back, you know people, but you don't necessarily take up where you left off. You know what I mean?
I know, because you know people, but they got old.
Well, that, and they've moved on with their life just like you moved on with yours. So you basically start all over again, making the friendships last or getting them restarted or whatever.
I know. I moved away and worked lived in different places: Oak Ridge, Tennessee, Morgantown, West Virginia. Did a lot of traveling in my jobs. But I always knew I wanted to come back. And if you ask me why, I honestly couldn't tell you. There's a different mindset in a lot of those towns. There's a greater diversity. Mm-hmm. You meet a lot of people who are smarter than you are. And I don't know, I kind of miss that, because here we're not really all the same, but we're similar.
Yeah. Are you saying we're boring, Joe? I don't know.
Sure.
Well, I wouldn't trade moving back for anything.
You're glad you did.
I'm glad I did. But yeah, Indianapolis is just not a safe place to live anymore. Even the downtown area that they worked so hard on to revitalize and make it a destination, it's not safe. My daughter that has moved here, Karen, worked downtown Indy. They didn't actually live in Indianapolis. They lived in Brown County, and her commute to work was horrible. Just, 1 hour each way to work. And she got really tired of that drive, but she worked downtown, and it is not safe anymore. There's just too much stuff going on for it to be safe.
I imagine the fact that two daughters have moved back has also made your move better.
Oh yeah, definitely.
And you have a lot of other relatives.
Oh yeah.
We both do.
Yeah.
I suspect if you go back 2 generations, certainly 3, all of us who grew up in Ballard County are kin somehow to everybody else.
It's almost scary. It just really is. It's, when you try to explain your connection to different people, it almost, it gets scary. But it's, so far I think we're okay. But.
Well, we're going to wrap this up pretty soon, but I'd like to know if you have any more stories that you can share with us that might make us chuckle or cry or...
Well, one story I was going to share with you, it's not necessarily funny, it's just sort of factual. We were talking about 286. Mm-hmm. Don't know if you're aware that the route that it takes now is not the route that it always took to Paducah. When my parents moved to the farm, the house was back on Miller Road because 286 did not go any further than right there at Miller Road. That was the road to take to go to anywhere Miller Road was.
You mean 286 ended?
Well, it came from Wycliffe that far. It wasn't even 286 at that time. It was just the way to Paducah. The state apparently decided that they needed to change things, so they basically took the property on the south end of the farm there and went straight through it and left maybe a teeny tiny little space just across the road that was still part of the farm, but nothing that was usable. But anyway, the house that my siblings and I were born in, Morris and my sister Linda were born when the house was back on the other side of the farm. But when they moved the house after the road was finished in, I believe, 1938.
I don't remember.
Anyway, that's when they moved the house up to where the present house is, not the one they moved, but the present house. But they moved it with a team of horses and logs and what they called a windlass. And Morris explained it to me one time of how they did it, and it took like a week to move the house by the cables and everything that they attached to the house, and they'd move it a little ways.
You mean they just pulled the whole house, essentially?
2-story house, and they moved it Miller Road to where my present house is. But I thought that was a very interesting story that, people probably think 286 has always been that way, but I guess it went all kinds of ways, Stall Road and every way to get to Paducah.
I'm trying to think. I believe that in my lifetime it's always been...
Oh, yeah.
Well, not all the way to Paducah because it really runs into Highway 62.
Right.
Although... if it weren't for the curve there where 62 goes down toward Lovelandsville, it could all be one road.
Right. But it didn't always have that path. It started as a horse and buggy path, actually, I think.
Wow, that's interesting.
But there's all kinds of stories about that. As far as funny stories, I probably got some. I just can't think of any right offhand. I'll have to.
Well, you can giggle.
I could giggle. Yeah, I could giggle.
Well, I'll tell you what, I won't press you to try to come up with anything because we've done a really good conversation here, and I've enjoyed talking with you. I really thank you for coming out.
I've enjoyed it. I thank you for having me, and I don't know how much of what I've got to say is that interesting, but yeah, it's been fun.
It has been fun.
And that's today's view as seen from Joe's Place in Monkey's Eyebrow. Please visit us again next time.